Hi everyone, Clint Edmondson from Microsoft. In this screencast we're going to talk about sketching interactions with sequence diagrams. But first, a reminder about our business context. Our client for this series is Tailspin Toys. They're a small brick and mortar hobby shop that sells model airplanes, and they're looking for an online storefront to supplement in-store sales. Let's talk briefly about what a sequence diagram is. It's used to capture dynamic behavior, that is, the life cycles of objects and how they collaborate together to deliver the required system functionality, and it shows sequential flow of time. Specifically, it shows interactions between nouns in your system. Those nouns can be actors, classes, components, or other subsystems. And these interactions consist of messages between typical instances of those objects during runtime. So let's do a little demo of sketching some interactions using sequence diagrams. I briefly want to review the use case for this scenario we're going to be sketching. It's use case 1, browse for toys. You can see here in this document I've got the diagram with the use case in question highlighted in yellow and the included use cases in gray. I've got the basic flow, a set of alternative flows, and a subflow down at the bottom. Our team's designer has also given me some screen mockups. Here is the home screen, listing screen for a list of models in a particular category, and the details screen for an individual model. Here we are in Visual Studio, and I'm going to open up our design model, and I'm going to start by creating a new subfolder. We're going to call this Dynamic View, and this will contain our sequence diagrams for all of our use cases. So let's create another subfolder under there, and we'll call it UC01 Browse for Toys. And let's create our first diagram for the basic flow. So let's add new item, choose UML sequence diagram, and we'll name it basic flow. I will first go into the toolbox and create a comment. I like to start off all of my use case sequence diagrams by pasting in the text from the flow we're going to be working on. So I'm going to switch over to our use case and grab the text. Double click and paste that in there. And let's clean it up just a little bit. A little bit of extra work up front, but for me it keeps me from switching back and forth between applications as I do my designs. There we go. And now we need our first actor because sequence diagrams always begin with an actor. Now, one of the disadvantages of creating two separate models, an analysis model and design model, is that we no longer have actors in our design model. They are all up in the analysis model that we use to create our use cases. So in this instance, I'm going to have to add a new actor to my design model. We'll call it customer. And it's a small price to pay, but I like to keep them separate just for sake of separation of concerns. This model is all about the design we're going to be implementing. The first model is all about the understanding the problem that we're going to be solving. So created that first customer, and let's go ahead and drag that onto the diagram. Now by default, it creates an instance named customer with lowercase c. I'm going to take that off there because we're really not concerned about an instance versus the generic class at this point, or the generic element. So we'll just leave it as customer. Notice the little icon there. That indicates that this element is associated with something in our design model. And you can see down here it's Tailspin Toys.design model customer. Of course we could change that, but we'll leave it as is. This web application. So I'm going to start by creating a home controller. Let's go back over here. We'll create a new lifeline. We'll call that home controller. Spread it out a little bit. And according to the first step in this basic flow, the use case starts when the customer navigates to the application. So let's create a message, a synchronous message from the customer to the home controller. And we're just going to use the URL notation home here. Notice the messages can be in any format. It's just free-form text. So we're going to use the navigation URL. And we know the MVC framework returns a view result. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in as return type. Second step, the system presents a list of toy categories to choose from. Well, we're going to need to return that from the database. So let's go ahead and create another lifeline. and we will name this product repository. Again, spread this out with a little bit of space, and let's create a synchronous message out to that, and we'll call it get product categories, and that will return a product category list. That gets us our list back for step 2. Now we need to render that to the screen so that the customer can choose the category to see the products for. So let's go ahead and add in the steps necessary for that. I will grab a synchronous message and double click on Home Controller. We're going to set the view data for rendering to product categories equals the product category list we returned. Let's drag that down a little, create a little space, and then we are going to fire off another message to the home controller to itself, this.view, and we want to have it render the home page. If you're familiar with the MVC framework, by calling this.view and specifying a page to render, the framework will use a little bit of reflection, go look for a matching ASPX page with the name home, and use that to render the contents for the given view data. So we need to create another lifeline to get us there, and we will call this home.aspx. And the call to view will fire off a call to render that. Since that's done by the framework, I'm going to leave that blank, and this will return a view result, and that ultimately gets returned back to our customer. So that gets us through step 1 and step 2. Next, step 3, customer selects a category. Well, this will involve another interaction with the system. So let's scroll down a little bit and create another synchronous message to the home controller. And in this case, they will navigate to home, category, and we will use a variable here, category name. Let's spread this out a little more so you can see the full URL. So there you go. So the format for our URL to navigate to a particular category and see the listing is home/category, and then inserted the category name there. And that will return a view result as well. So to get this information back to the screen, we're going to need another synchronous message back to the product repository. And this time we will do get products for category, pass in the category name. Make a little room here so we can read it all. That will return a product list. Just like before, we will set the view data on the controller. And then we will render it. So one final message. This.view. In this case, we're going to be rendering a different page. Call that one listing, which means we need another lifeline. So let's go ahead and drag one of those up on here. We'll call that listing.aspx. Let's give ourselves a little more room. I'm constrained a little bit by the screen recording dimensions, but normally you would have this on a nice big monitor. Scroll back down. So once again, this will fire off a message to the listing. It's built into the framework, so we'll leave the message off. This returns a view result, and that ultimately is what gets returned back to the customer. All right, so that gets us through, let's see, steps 1, 2, and 3, and 4 as well. So system displays a list of toys for the selected toy category. Next it says customer selects a toy, and then step 6 says perform view toy details to display detailed information for the selected toy. And that's a call out to our subflow. So at this point, I'm not going to do any more design or sketching on this diagram. What I'm going to do is draw another interaction use, which basically says let's reference another sequence diagram, and we will reference S1 view toy details. That says at this point in the flow, we will basically call out to a subflow to handle the next set of interactions. So I think that's pretty good for the basic flow. So let's go ahead and create that subflow just to make sure we've got a good feel for how to create these diagrams. So I'm going to create another sequence diagram. Call this S1 view toy details. Let's create a comment and once again drop in the text for this subflow. I'll switch over to Word real quick. Paste that in there and we will clean it up. There we go. We'll switch over to Model Explorer and we will grab the customer we've already created. Once again, I'm not concerned about the instance names. Let's go ahead and delete that off. All right, so step 1 says the system displays information about the chosen toy, including its name, teaser, description, price, etc. We'll go over to our toolbox and we will once again create a lifeline for the home controller. Since I'm going to have the home controller handle all these requests, we will create a synchronous operation. And this time the URL format will be home/product and then a variable for the SKU. And that will return a view result back to the client. Let's go ahead and create our lifeline here again for the product repository. And we will call getProduct. Pass in the SKU. That will return a product. And just like the other sequence diagram, we're going to set this up in view data. And then call this.view details to render it. So we need a details page, details.aspx, an anonymous message, and this will return the view result that we will ultimately return back to the client. And then according to this flow, use case resumes at the next step, which puts us back to the basic flow. At this point, we have sketched out both the basic flow and one subflow, so I think we're pretty good. In the next screencast, we're going to be looking at how to take this set of sequences and discover the actual classes that we will be implementing. But for now, I think we'll switch back to the slide deck. Some tips for working with sequence diagrams. First, you should drive your designs from the perspective of the user, so start each sequence with an actor. If you have a special situation where you're working on a technical sequence, a common best practice is to use a special actor named flow. Always remember that form follows function. You should lead your designs with sequence diagrams and the classes will emerge, and we'll see how that works in the next screencast. A common question is, how much design do I need to do? Typically, you only design to the level of detail necessary to reflect what has not yet been designed in your other designs or what has not yet been implemented. And always remember, design is about solving problems. Model only what you need to solve the problem and communicate that solution to others. Anything more and you're just writing documentation. Here are some great references for you. UML2 and the unified process, elements of UML 2.0 style, and use case modeling. Once again, all of the models created in this screencast series were done with Visual Studio 2010 Ultimate. You can download the trial here. I've also listed the architecture team's blog as well as my blog so that you can download these materials. Thanks for tuning in.